Remember, Sigmund Freud was the father of psychoanalysis, which was his effort to analyze or study the human mind and conflicts inside the mind. Freud rejected a number of so-called treatments for the mentally ill, and he toyed with others, experimenting with Charcot's hypothesis, for example, even with drugs, and most infamously, cocaine. Like so many people, Freud misunderstood cocaine, praising its ability to lessen physical or psychological pain. He even boasted about how great cocaine was in allowing him to access memories he didn't know he had. Oh yes, Freud was very fond of his cocaine, but at the same time he failed to recognize how dangerously addictive cocaine is. A friend of his, Ernest von Fleischl-Marchow, a physiologist, has become addicted to morphine in his struggle to fight the pain of when he had lacerated his own thumb while dissecting a cadaver. Freud rushed to his aid, convinced him to use cocaine instead. As a result, Fleischl-Marchow became addicted to both morphine and cocaine and died miserably from his addictions 8 years later. So Freud had a real struggle ahead of him. He needed to create a treatment that really worked for his patients. Not cocaine, not hypnosis, not shock therapy. Something real, something effective, and in his efforts to understand the structure of the mind, Freud developed this unique form of treatment for mental illness, for analyzing the mind and resolving conflict, which a patient of Freud's colleague, Joseph Brauer, called the talking cure. In an oversimplistic way, you could think of it as the truth will set you free. Freud believed that you suffer because of mental conflict, a struggle between the different parts of your mind, the id, the ego, and the superego. And up to now, you've refused to face this conflict, to deal with it. In fact, you may not even know it's there. But if I can get you to talk about it, to face it, then we can deal with it and hopefully alleviate your suffering. Freud's psychoanalysis centered around a couch, probably the most famous couch in all of history, Freud's couch. Not for him to sit in. This is where patients would lie down and talk, while Freud sat behind the head of the couch where the patient couldn't see him. And that's important, you see. Freud quickly learned that a patient can develop intense feelings for the analyst, both love and loathing, a desire to escape the doctor or a desire to do whatever is necessary to please the doctor. Freud decided that as the doctor, he needed to be absent, unseen, outside the patient's vision. If the patient can't see him, then hopefully the patient wouldn't be distracted by him, and so the patient's speech will be more natural, more open, more honest. The most fundamental rule of psychoanalysis as a form of therapy is known as free association. Association here is like linking ideas, let's say. And the free association means essentially that the patient should be encouraged to speak freely, unrestrained, about whatever comes to mind, whatever comes to his or her mind. Whatever comes in your mind, say it, don't hold back. Freud believed that so long as the patient was allowed to speak freely, the patient's speech would eventually reveal clues about his conflict. His mental disorder, as one idea spoken by the patient links to another, and so on. If you go on talking without restraint, then your mind has to lead you back to the problem, because that problem, that conflict, is such a very big deal for your mind. It may not happen quickly, it might take a long time, in fact, for the problem to be revealed. but it could be far worse if you have a therapist who dominates the conversation, basically telling the patient what to think. What do I mean by that? Again, from Freud's perspective, if you spend an hour with your therapist and you notice that the therapist does more talking than you, then you really need to find a new therapist. How is a therapist, an analyst, going to help you unless they shut up and listen to what you, the patient, have to say? The role of the psychoanalysis is therefore first to listen. Listen carefully to what the patient is saying and to what the patient is not saying, since the patient might avoid talking about the painful issues in her mind. Second, the analyst looks for clues about the nature of the disorder, what it is, what caused it, so that he can help the patient fully understand the conflict in her mind and thus be freed of that conflict. And finally, the analyst needs to keep the patient on track. These are painful issues, after all, and the closer the patient comes to facing the conflict, the more she might try to steer clear of the issues. Avoid talking about them. This is known as active resistance. Active resistance is one of those things that a patient might do in therapy. Avoid talking about something painful, which can create a challenge for the psychoanalyst, right? But that very same resistance is a good clue, a clear sign helping to identify the mental conflict. It's a defense mechanism, a defense against the truth, because the truth can be so very difficult and painful for the individual to face. A woman who refuses to speak about her father in therapy is a simplistic example of this. After all, if your patient refuses to talk about her father, wouldn't you think there was something wrong there? But in Freud's experience, resistance often took a much more mysterious, albeit symbolic character. The symbols were there. It just took an attentive, insightful analyst to read those symbols and help the patient uncover the truth. Dreams can also be very symbolic. Freud believed that dreams can reveal a great deal about the inner workings of the mind through symbols. And some of these dream symbols represent our hidden desires, something we want in real life but can't have, or are afraid to pursue. Imagine a patient, for instance, who has had a recurring dream about the funeral of her sister's son. Now, if dreams are a form of wish fulfillment, then one might question why this woman would wish the death of her own nephew. Well, she didn't. What she wished was for the opportunity to meet again a man whom she deeply desired, a man she had been planning to marry. But the man had left and never returned, and being naturally quite hurt, she had repressed her desire for him. She would never consciously admit her desire for this man who had gone away. But the desire was there, and it surfaced in her dreams in this strange symbolic fashion. She dreamt of her nephew's funeral because the last time she had ever seen this man she desired was at her own nephew's funeral. That was the last time she had really seen him. And now, in her dreams, she recreates this funeral event not to see her nephew dead, but because it symbolically represents for her the chance to see this man again. So her dreams are one important form of revelation, of revealing what is actually happening in the mind.